Our next question, Jim, was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Sean Downs. Jim, is there any truth that Macho Man Randy Savage pistol whipped Bill Dundee in 1982?
Actually, did Savage get the gun and hit him with it, or Dundee went for the gun and Savage hit him with something he had in his hand?
I've heard both stories.
Regardless, I don't think pistol whipping does it justice. This was at the time where Jarrett's group and the Paphos ICW group, obviously the Paphos were running outlaw opposition to Jarrett, so there was heat on everybody's part. And then apparently Dundee, and I think these tights were even made or given to him by a fan or whatever, but he had Macho Man on the ass of his wrestling trunks, which of course was Macho Man Randy Savage's gimmick. So back when the days when you got mad about stuff like that, Dundee was in Hendersonville or somewhere around Nashville at the gym working out one day, and appeared from out of nowhere Randy Savage. I think he had George Weingeroff because George was a shooter. High school, college amateur wrestling shooter.
They were all there. They were all there.
Pez Watley was there.
Thunderbolt Patterson was there.
Thunderbolt Patterson was there. So all
Rogers was there.
Well, I didn't know whether Rip was there or not. But I know that also I believe Debbie Combs was was it Debbie Combs or was it Candy Devine that was the lookout?
Candy Devine.
Candy Devine, that's right. I'm sorry, I don't mean to malign Debbie. But anyway, somebody found out Dundee was at the gym, and they call and stooge. It may have been Candy Devine. And here rolls everybody up from ICW, and they accost Dundee in the parking lot where he's trying, no problem. Let me just set my bag in my trunk where he can get his gun because he's going to shoot all these motherfuckers. But then as he was pulling it out, they glommed him, and Savage either got the gun and smacked him in the side of the head with it, or already had something and punched him in the side of the head, but broke his jaw and necessitated him taking, I think it was a couple or 3 weeks off from wrestling because I think he had to get it wired and the whole 9 yards. And there was heat there because now not only, I'm sure Jarrett took care of him, but not only did you incapacitate one of the top baby faces in the territory and hurt the houses for a couple of weeks, but also that's one of those things that people don't forget. And coincidentally, when it all got settled, as we talked about here on the program not long ago, Dundee's the one guy that left to go to Louisiana before they could bring Randy Savage back, or Randy Savage into Memphis, after that they had closed ICW down and do the deal with Lawler, because I'm pretty sure Dundee probably at that point would have gone for the gun again had he seen Randy Savage in person. So that was one of those deals.
A couple other little clues here. Recently on the Superpodcast, I had Todd Lloyd, who's probably best known as being the fat kid, as he put it, in Ernest Goes to Camp, which was filmed in the Nashville area, which is where he grew up. And he said to me that Candy Devine worked at the gym in Nashville. So that
that's there you go. Candy Devine called in and said, "Hey, guess who's here?" And then they all came on down.
And then the second thing is, I believe Rip Rogers said on the Superpodcast, because he went into great detail about the whole thing, that the first phone call that was made was to Saul Weingeroff, because he was a sheriff's deputy, right, in the area.
Well, but he was, but also he had been on the outs with Jerry Jarrett since 1972, when, as detailed in my book, Tuesday Night at the Gardens. And George Weingeroff claims there's more to it than this. However, Saul Weingeroff was always a Nick Goulas guy, and he was the top manager out of Nashville for 10 or 15 years with the Von Brauners and whoever else. You put Saul with them, they've got heat, right? When Jerry Jarrett took over and opened up the Memphis, the Louisville and Evansville end to go along with Memphis, he started using Sam Bass. He started using other managers. He started bringing new talent in. That, along with, at the time when he opened up Lexington, it ran on the same night as Bowling Green, Kentucky, Thursday nights. And Bowling Green was 60 miles from Nashville, whereas Lexington was 210. And Saul went in and told Nick Goulas one day, said, "Well, that boy, if he's running Lexington, make sure I'm on the card in Bowling Green. He didn't want to go all the way up to Lexington. Well, when Lexington started out drawing Bowling Green and the payoffs got better, Jerry Jarrett says that Saul Weingroff came to him and said, well, when am I going to get booked in Lexington? And he said, I understand you don't want to, and I don't intend to violate your wishes. Having said that, that's an awful strong reason to quit and go opposition, but son of a gun, within 6 months, Saul and the Von Brauners were working for Phil Golden's All-Star Wrestling and running opposition to Jarrett and Nick and Roy all up and down the 64 corridor. So Saul had been on the outs with Jerry Jarrett and all the guys in his territory for years at that point. But he did also work in the sheriff's department. So that was probably a track covering call.
You said George Weingroff has a different story. Have you talked to George Weingroff about this?
No, I heard somebody said that George said, well, now that's not necessarily all that happened. And once again, when we're talking about 45 years ago with heat between managers and wrestlers and promoters and bookers and everything, I'm open to interpretation. But Saul made up at one point with Nick after that, but he never again worked with wrestling in anything that Jerry Jarrett was involved in after 1972. And he also, even in later years, 76 with the IWA and the Islanders and et cetera, he ran opposition, worked opposition to Nick in Nashville. So he was figured in for 15 years. It was unshakable. And then suddenly he was always on the outs from that point on.
How overlooked do you think Saul and the Von Brauners are in terms of being major attractions?
Oh, God, they were one of the biggest tag teams of the 60s everywhere. Florida, Tennessee, Texas, California. They went everywhere. They were the Von Brauners. It's hard to explain now, but there were gimmicks that in the territory days that kind of went with each other, like the Von Brauners, the Von Steigers, the Otto von Heller, whatever, the Germans, right? The Von Brauners were seen as the main event, real, original German team at that point. And then other teams were kind of like Von Brauner-like. Because people did the same gimmicks in different places in those days, right? But, you know, of German tag teams in the 60s and 70s, the Von Brauners were seen by the fans as like the big ones, the real deal.